My dear brothers and sisters in Christ, in today's first reading, we have that sad scene where Moses, the prophet of God, Moses, the liberator, Moses, the intercessor, and Moses, the friend of God, is shown the promised land from a distance. And Moses breathes his last. You will think Moses will be allowed an opportunity to lead the people to the promised land. And yet it will seem in God's eyes Moses has played his role. He bows out of the scene, and yet God remains with God's people. A powerful image of what it means to serve God. We are mere instruments and never masters. It's God who guides the way. It's God who brings to the end. And yet God's project, God's mission is unhindered by any one of us' absence. If the first reading speaks to us of Moses' death and God's abiding presence, it is also assuring. For Moses has seen the promised land and is not afraid to die. In seeing the promised land, he sees God who fulfills his promises. The people he has led are on the verge of seeing the fulfillment of God's promises. Moses does not need to enter the promised land to know that God is faithful. The gospel is about God's presence through his Son. Where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am. So says Jesus. My dear brothers and sisters in Christ, be wary of a cheap gospel. It is not just about getting reconciled to people you do not feel comfortable in their presence. It is not about a way or working your way towards the excommunication of those who do not think in the same way you do. If anything, the gospel says to us, if we think we have been offended, then the burden lies on us. I find this very challenging. Jesus says, if your brother sins against you, you are the one to go out and seek him. You don't wait for him to come and apologize. You go out in search of him. And when you have found him, you try and get reconciled with him. When that fails, you do not give up on him. You engage outsiders. You engage the community. The desired end is not to cut him off, is to bring him back to the fold. And Jesus will put this in another way when he will answer the question of Peter. How many times must I forgive my brother who has sinned against me? And Jesus will say, forgiveness knows no limit. Stop counting. Focus on getting him back. Such an attitude, my dear brothers and sisters in Christ, impoverishes us. It speaks to us of the poverty of God. It speaks to us of the simplicity that must be ours. And it speaks to us of keeping our gaze on God. Providentially, today we celebrate the feast of St. Clare. That poor woman of Assisi, that simple woman who devoted the rest of her life to contemplating God, who stripped herself of all possessions so that she could be rich in God. And indeed, in her contemplation, she became the source of wisdom to those around her. They sought her counsel. They sought material help from her. She had been schooled in the school of God. She had allowed herself to be influenced by God. And I find the words that she uttered on her deathbed very profound. She is heard to say, "Go forth in peace, for you have followed the good road. Go forth without fear, for he who created you has made you holy. He has always protected you and loves you as a mother." That prayer can only be our prayer when we learn the meaning of going out in search of a lost brother or sister.